been told that we don't belong in these spaces that we're talking about, right? Or like that this is not that's supposed to happen to someone like you, but hey, it is, right? And it's
Mhm.
happening for a reason, and it's because you worked hard. You are resilient. You have gone through so much more in life and have made it than some of your counterparts. And you have that grit and that ability to figure things out, you're gonna figure it out. What drives me is my community. I feel honored to be part of the immigrant community, and the immigrant community has sacrificed a lot for me to be where I am. It's really a labor of love, out of love for my family, my ancestors, the various Latino and immigrant attorneys who paved the way so that people like us could be in these positions. And now to be able to use my education, my power, and my privilege to open the doors for those who are coming after me.
We're thrilled to have with us today Marissa Montes, a groundbreaking and preeminent attorney, a beloved and distinguished professor of law at Loyola Law School, a relentless and fearless director of arguably the most one-of-a-kind community-based clinic in the United States, and a driven and zealous advocate for students, immigrants, and all those that find themselves marginalized in the corners of our society. Today, on The Art of Purpose, Marissa will share with us her incredible journey toward finding her purpose. We'll hear about Marissa's inspiring story, including the many challenges that she faced and overcame throughout the course of her life, and she'll share with us, all of us, some wise advice about navigating life and finding your purpose, even when everything and everyone around you says that it's impossible. Hello, Marissa, and welcome to The Art of Purpose.
Thank you so much, Kenny, for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah,
I
well, I
appreciate
think
it.
I think that even falls short of everything that you've done, who you are, and I'm excited to get into it and for everybody to learn about you and hear about you and really, honestly, be inspired because from us and as I've told you before and we're a family, like your story and everything that you're doing is inspiring, and certainly to us, and it'll be to many people.
Yeah, well, you all inspire me, and so does my community. So,
Yeah.
yeah, well, let's get started.
Yeah. All right. So look, I thought about starting sort of like lighthearted. There's all these little questions like movies and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But in prepping for today's podcast, one of the things that kept standing out to me about you, and the word that came to mind, I was trying to find one word or a few words that would describe Marissa. But the thing that kept coming to mind is creator, and how you have created literally everything that is around you when it didn't exist. There was no clinic, there was no organization, there was no professorship, there was none of that, and you created it from nothing. That it requires you to be a visionary, but not just that, it's also the strategy and the force of will to bring things to fruition. So creator was the thing that came to mind when I thought about you. And so I wanted to start off right away and just kind of ask you, what drives you?
Oh man, that's actually a very tough and complex question,
Mhm.
I feel. In terms of my work, what drives me is my community. I feel honored to be part of the immigrant community, and the immigrant community has sacrificed a lot for me to be where I am. So I always tell people, and like particularly my students, like I never say that this is like a responsibility of mine. It's really a labor of love, out of love for my family, my ancestors, the various Latino and immigrant attorneys who paved the way so that people like us could be in these positions. And now to be able to use my education, my power, and my privilege to open the doors for those who are coming after me. So that's really what drives me. And luckily, throughout my own history, I've had people who have really believed in me and have lent a helping hand to me and my family. And more than anything, it's been other members of the immigrant community. And that's what has really driven me to do my work. So there's that, the community, but there's also my students. One of the things that I absolutely love about my job is that I get to do both represent people, but also work with students, the majority of them who are which first generation students of color, immigrant students themselves. and then being able to see how they can use their education to really make an impact in somebody's life or in their own community. So I would say like that's kind of in a nutshell, like what drives me to do the work.
Yeah.
But it's multiple factors.
Yeah, and you mentioned something really interesting there because sometimes it is out of a sense of like responsibility that people do something or like we owe. There's like a debt to pay, right? And that certainly drives people and is a motivating factor for people. But I like what you said there, right? It's not that it's not out of that. It's a labor of love, right? And so I don't know if at some point you felt that it was like a sense of responsibility, like having to pay that back, or I don't know if it switched at some point and like what caused that switch. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like how does it go from feeling like, oh, I have to pay people back to like, no, this is something I want to do because I love this community.
Yeah. I think it's been a motive of mine since I started doing immigrant rights work, which was actually in high school. And the reason being because I don't like to call it a responsibility because responsibility also means it's a burden, right? And I've had the conversation with multiple like students coming up, and I tell like it doesn't matter what area of law or what you end up doing in your life, but some of them tell me like I really need to make money to support my family. I can't do immigrant rights work right now or public interest work. It's okay, right? It shouldn't feel like a burden. If something starts feeling like a burden, then maybe it's not your cause or your call, right? But I do believe that you should, whatever it is that you end up doing should be a labor of love because you should love what you do, you know? And I've never been motivated by money. I've never been really motivated by glory or attention. I've really always been motivated by serving others. I think that's been something of mine since my mom would say like since I was a kid. So being able to, I think it's one of the ways that I show love, right? One of your love languages, acts of service. So having that be for my community is uplifting and fulfills me. And it's been that way for me from the start. Don't get me wrong, it's hard. There's moments where it gets really hard and I get really tired and I get super burnt out. But reminding myself that it's a labor of love is really what should motivate any purpose, I feel.
Yeah, I think that's so important because oftentimes, yes, the driving factor is money, right? Particularly if we're talking about like an immigrant community background, right? You have to do more to help the family out, and that's a great thing. I encourage young people to do that. That's awesome. If you want to take on that responsibility as well, and even if it's a burden, great. Nonetheless, I think there's also folks that are built, and everybody's wired differently. We need so many different types of people in our society, right? And people that put people first. And that is their drive, that is their motivation. That's so selfless and so needed in our community as well. And I love that we're going to talk about you and everything you've done, but for young people that are listening to be able to see like there is, if that's you, if you like love people and you love helping folks, and that is what motivates you, that's what brings you happiness as well. Like there are careers that are fulfilling and that are great, and you can do that if that's your personality. You don't have to, try to be somebody that you're not.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm luckily at the point where I'm like starving doing the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I always tell people too is that if you love what you do, the success will come because you're giving it your heart.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got to pay your dues, but it'll come.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right. So speaking of. It's funny, in my notes, I have community written all over the place, all right, and the different sort of stages of your life. And you've mentioned that a few times already. So I wanted to get into that a little bit and you growing up. So can you talk to us a little bit how, where you come from? Your family is from Mexico, and, the transition into the U.S. I think there are a lot of people that have experienced that, whether it's directly, maybe it's first generation, however, second generation, but a lot of that I think is a shared experience.
Yeah.
Even the American story.
Yeah, no, completely. And, my upbringing, my life experience, and that of my family is what really has driven me to do immigrant rights work. So I was born in Guadalajara. I came to the United States when I was 2 because like many, immigrant parents seeking better economic opportunities and safety while I was down there. So while I was down there, I was little, but my dad was actually kidnapped because of mistaken identity. And that was one of the motivating factors why my dad was like, you know what, like maybe we should come up. But
Wow.
coming up to the States was a struggle. I was fortunate enough to come to the United States in a way that was legal per se.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you to my grandmother, who was actually born in Los Angeles, passed down her citizenship to my
Mm,
dad, who
mm.
then passed down his citizenship to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he then petitioned for my mom. But
Okay.
despite the fact that, we were able, and this is something that I always talk about too in my story, is that like it's very easy for people to say, like, why can't you just do it the right way? It's
Mhm,
not that easy. It just
mhm,
happened to be lucky enough that my grandmother was born in the
mhm.
States,
Yeah.
that we had this access to enter this way. But it doesn't mean that you also don't face challenges coming to the States. I mean, you do have much more privileges than someone who experiences being undocumented, but the adjustment, being
Yeah.
accepted, and so on is still a struggle.
Mhm.
So when we arrived to the United States, we actually experienced homelessness
Yeah.
for a period of time, and it was a Pakistani family who took us in.
Mm.
So when I was little, we lived with this Pakistani family, I think for about a month. I was like 3 years old, but I still remember them. I love them greatly. And it was my first basically like taste per se
Mhm.
of like the immigrant community lending a helping hand to another immigrant family. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from the same background because we
Mhm.
all have these same experiences,
Yeah.
as you were saying. So from there, once my dad in particular was able to get himself on his feet, we
Can
moved to
can you
Culver.
tell us how old you were when you came over?
I was 2 years old.
You were 2
I
years
was
old.
two.
Okay.
I
Okay.
was like 3 when we lived with the Pakistani family.
Mhm.
And then we ended up moving to Culver City, and in the apartment building that we lived in, there was a Brazilian man who I call my Tio Mauro. May he now
Mhm.
rest in peace. And an Irani
Mm.
family that lived next door that very much like adopted me and my mom when
Wow.
my dad would had to go to work because my mom obviously didn't speak English, and they really became our family and community while I was growing up because we didn't have family, right? All
Mhm.
of our family was in Mexico, and the beautiful thing was, despite there being lack of language, being able to communicate through language,
Mhm.
because the lady, the señora that lived next door, Zahira was her name.
Mhm.
She also spoke very little English, but
Oh,
somehow found ways to communicate
communicate
with
with you.
us and my
Oh.
mom, and it was mostly via food, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah.
But that sense of
Sure.
community and adoption was very
Yeah.
strong, right, from the immigrant community. And then, thankfully, to my mom, I ended up actually growing up in the South Bay.
Nice.
So, Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach
Right, right.
area, which is a very white, privileged neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
But growing up there was because my mom was adamant that she wanted me to go to a very good school
School.
district, right?
Mhm.
And that's when I started. I actually didn't learn English until I started kindergarten.
Mhm.
I remember going to my ESL classes, and it was mostly other Asian students. So a lot of my friends
Mm.
growing up were Japanese because we were all learning English
Mm.
together. But the other thing that I bring up is that when I was in elementary school, my dad unfortunately had a major health issue where he was basically incapacitated for about a month. And then it was a Honduran family
Mm.
who stepped in to help me and my mom, right?
Okay.
Along with someone who I affectionately call my Tia Ann, who is from the United States. She's an American woman. But again, the sense of community and
Yeah.
paying back and fostering and understanding one another. And so I started getting into immigrant rights work actually because when I was in high school, it was my first time that I decided to do like my activist moment. And this was the time when they first attempted to give undocumented immigrant licenses and it didn't pass. And they were
Mm.
staging a
Mhm.
day without a Mexican. I don't know if you remember this in high
Yeah,
school. Yeah.
vaguely. Yeah. No,
And
I
I went
remember.
home, I told my mom that I wasn't going to go to school. She laughed at me, right? 'Cause
All
she's
right.
like, we'd not come to this country for you not to go to school. And, but I was a nerd, did really well. And I decided not to go, and I was truant. Long story short, I came back to school. My teachers were really surprised, and they basically asked me why I skipped class. I explained. Two teachers took interest in what I did. One of them had me present in class as to like the rights of the undocumented community, and I got major backlash from my
Mm.
classmates. So much
Mm.
so that I ran over 2 class periods, And it was very much not my first taste of discrimination, but it made me very clear. It became very apparent to me, like what my fellow classmates in
Mm,
this predominantly white conservative space thought of me
mm,
and the community that I so loved and helped me throughout my childhood. And basically, that was like, nah, I'm dedicating myself to this
sure.
work.
Wow.
So long story short as to how community played a
Yeah.
role. And that's why I always say, like, if it wasn't for those people who intervened, if it wasn't for the other immigrant families that intervened in my life, I don't know if I would have would be where I am today,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I thank them because they provided me with purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's such a wonderful story of many communities and people from many communities, different communities, just stepping into your life, right? And your mother's life as well, your lives, and um, helping. And there's, I think, no other show of selflessness than just helping folks out in times of need when there's nothing to be expected back, right? And so in interacting, I think maybe like in the moment you're so young, maybe you don't understand. You're just sort of like receiving this help. When you look back on it, um, and you said that that helped shape you, but I think that helps explain a little bit of why you are who you are with whomever is around you, right? And whoever needs help, and it doesn't matter. Um, was it that, was it, when you look back on it, is it like love that you most kind of felt from those communities or people when they reached out? Was it, what was it that you felt from them, and that's something that you carry on
Hmm.
today even?
Yeah, love, support. I think more than anything, especially when you come from marginalized communities, is the fact that you're so used to becoming, because we were at the end of the day ostracized,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
Seen as less than, sometimes even like subhuman,
mhm, mhm,
and to have someone else believe in you,
mm,
right?
mhm,
Seeing your worth and wanting to lend a helping hand, I think is what I felt, right? Is that
mhm,
especially as a child, like, wow, someone believes in me, someone cares about me, someone thinks that someone like me can make it, or that we're worth helping, or
mm,
supporting, fostering, Um, yeah, because I don't want to use help, because help sometimes feels like, maybe like the savior dynamic, but it's more like
mm.
fostering, supporting,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
I think that's what allowed me to thrive and flourish as a kid, and all other things too, experiences that I had. Um, but yeah, to continue basically my educational
Yeah.
endeavor
Yeah.
that has landed me here. Yeah.
Was there any experiences growing up that you had with like the legal system, with the law rather? I know you talked about walking
Uh
out,
huh.
but like with maybe coming across attorneys or maybe with family or
Yeah.
something where you saw an attorney and said, wow, kind of like that seems like something that I want to do even at such a young age.
Yeah. So actually, I didn't meet many attorneys growing up.
Hmm.
In an interaction with the legal system, and it didn't actually have to do much with immigration
Mm.
because my mom was a longtime green holder. I still remember when she became a U.S. citizen when I was in high school.
Uh,
But more than anything, when I've thought about it, is like because of my dad's disability, the
mhm,
discrimination he experienced in employment
mhm,
when it comes to issues of housing, that I felt that my parents didn't have the tools for. That now in retrospect, I was like, my dad was clearly discriminated, right?
mhm,
Had we
mhm.
contacted an attorney, could have
Yeah.
probably helped. The first attorney that I actually met was in high school, and it's a mentor of ours in the law, Maria Villa.
Yeah, of course. Maria.
And
We're
my
huge fans, Maria.
yeah, and I know I always try to give Maria a shout out,
Yeah.
um, whenever I can. And my mom had actually met her because my mom was the teacher for her son. My mom was a Spanish teacher for Montessori,
Ah,
and she told her, like, my daughter wants to be a lawyer, because I
uh,
told her I wanted to be an immigration attorney. And well, my mom knew I wanted to be an immigration attorney. And Maria was really the first person that I saw that looked like me, who was an attorney, right?
mhm,
And made me think, like, oh, I can do it, right? Maybe
mm,
this is a path. I had no clue what I was doing. I was just in high school. And even I remember thinking, like, immigration's law, right? Even thinking like that. Like,
yeah.
so I should go to law school. Um, and finally finding a mentor at that age was very helpful, because she was able to help guide me basically, like, through college and then to the process when it came to applying to
Yeah.
law school.
The importance of seeing someone like you, who is what you want to be. I think representation, right? I didn't know any attorneys growing up either, and I joke, but it's true that I didn't really step foot inside a courtroom until I was in law school, right? And I was assigned to go to a
Mm-hmm.
courtroom to go watch something. I just knew that I wanted to be an attorney, but like you don't know actually what the steps are until like you have to do it in the moment. But maybe you don't even understand things, and you're just kind of trying to follow certain steps that you may have heard. Um, with seeing Maria and being exposed to someone who's an attorney, and now as an attorney, as a professor, as a director, everything that you're doing, do you see how that impacts like young people, and like what can either young people do to reach out, or older folks who are attorneys, right? Or professionals,
Yeah.
mentor
Yeah.
people.
No, completely. I still remember when I was in high school, Maria took me to the Latina Lawyers Bar
That's
Association event.
awesome.
And I remember just being very intimidated, even just by like the place setting, being like, I have no clue what to do with all these forks and knives.
Outside in.
Yeah. um, but being so inspired and thinking one day I'll be there, like one day I can actually be there. Representation is so important. And I think, especially when we're younger, we don't realize it because we're young,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And, especially where I grew up, it was all my teachers were primarily white. My classmates were primarily white. And I don't think it dawned on me how much that actually impacted me until I stepped out, you
Mhm,
know?
mhm,
And as a professor, I love being a professor. It's
mhm.
so much fun. Um, I, for a long time, was the only Latina professor at Loyola, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And I remember when I was a student at the Loyola, I didn't have any Latino professors. I had professors of color who were super supportive, and I love to this day and thank them. But how important it would have been to see a fellow Latino professor.
Mm,
And so I try to take up that space as much as I can. And I tell my students too, I always encourage them. I tell them, I was like, how many of you have actually had a professor that looks like me?
mm.
Right? Very few raise their hand. I always tell them, like, if you do, well, then that must be a really cool professor too. But I tell them, like, this space wasn't designed for me.
Mhm,
Right. So
mhm.
I'm not going to conform to it, but neither should you. And you, just like me, are able to take up space and be in these
Yeah,
positions.
yeah.
So it's incredibly important. And, like thankfully Maria like gave me the tools while I went to USC for undergrad, to seek out mentors there that have also helped me in my career as an immigration, not just attorney, but also professor. And then what I would tell young people is that we are eager to talk to you, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Please reach out to us. Like I've had students from undergrad send me cold emails
yeah.
and I will respond to you. We are a resource.
Mhm.
And like I said again, too, like I've had so many people paved the way for me that I'm happy to pave the way for others. And that's one of the reasons why I love teaching so much,
Yeah.
is because I'm the ability to connect with future generations of advocates. And even if you're just in high school or in college and are curious about law, reach out. We are here, we are a resource, and we need more people who look like us
Mhm,
in these spaces.
mhm.
And we want to foster you just like we were fostered, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And today it's become so much easier for that, right? You're right. I mean, I'll get cold emails or on social media, just like DMs or something, and I'm more than happy to jump on a call, jump on a Zoom, in person if they're around, if they want to do that.
Mhm.
It's so much easier to do that nowadays, and there are things just about the whole process of applying to law school, applying to college, right? Or what thing should I major in, right? I
Yeah.
spoke at my high school recently, and some classes about being an attorney, and at one point, actually on Sharon's prompting, we were just like, why don't we just ask them what they want to know?
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, what do you guys want to know about this? And all the questions were, and I encouraged them. I was like, hey, like ask anything, even if you think it sounds simple and people call it a dumb question, ask it.
Yeah.
And there were some very basic questions that are so important to know because we don't know. I didn't know when I was in high school, like what should I major in, or how should I apply? What do I do? And unless somebody tells you, you don't know.
Exactly.
So it's so great that you make yourself available, and uh, people should definitely reach out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, you experienced that in high school. You walked out. Experienced, I think, a passion in that moment in particular to help out your immigrant community.
Mhm.
When you're applying to college, do you want to go to a particular college because it's going to help in that sort of journey, or how did you arrive at going to ultimately USC?
Yeah. Talking about the immigrant experience and not knowing, I really didn't know.
Hmm.
Um, I did well in high school, and so I knew that college was the next step, right? My mom, grew up in Mexico, so the educational system to here was foreign to her. And my dad actually didn't complete his college degree until we came back to the States.
Mm.
So he had a different experience applying to college. I had college counselors at the high school that I went to who were actually pretty discriminatory towards me. And I
Mm.
remember even when I told them my GPA, they were like, "Are you sure? Like,
Yeah.
maybe we should bring it down a little bit," and trying to dissuade me to apply to a 4 year. And so
Oh
I
wow.
applied. And so the thing too is that, because immigrant households, not
Yeah.
allowed to apply to schools outside of the state of California.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and I did an array of, applications. And I got into USC, and it was the best school I got into, and I was super stoked, and I went.
Yeah.
I also had my best friend from high school going there, so that was
Makes it
also
easier.
make it
Yeah. Yeah.
easier. And I always joke around. I know you went to UCLA. We
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
still be friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
listen, my youngest sister went to
oh,
USC,
that's
so we're over
true.
that
Fight on,
already.
Chelsea.
Yeah. We are over that already.
um, but what was I forgot what I was saying about
All right, so
USC.
you decided to go to
I
USC.
decided to go to
Mhm.
USC. Had the best time of my life in college in comparison to law school. But when I was at USC, I basically started seeking out again community,
Mm.
right? So I became really involved in the pre-law fraternity because I'm a dork like that. But that's where I actually learned how to apply to law school and like the next steps. Because I was with other students who wanted to go to law school, and the fun thing there too is also in community. We took the LSAT together, we applied to law school together.
Mm.
We would rate our admission statements, read them, provide feedback, and then I was also part of Mitch at the USC,
Mhm.
and that's how I kind of kept fostering my political activism. And then I actually started interning at the law school for their immigration clinic, the USC Immigration Clinic.
Mm.
And that was really my first exposure to becoming a clinical professor.
Gotcha.
And the professor there, Professor Niels Frenzen, who's also one of my other longtime mentors, was my first exposure to actual immigration law, taking me to court,
Mm.
taking me to detention centers,
Mm.
took me down to Texas to do immigrant rights work. I started understanding more the system and understanding that the law is something that I wanted to pursue. And I also thought he had the coolest job ever. And I would always tell him, I was like, you get to teach, work with students
Yeah.
and you get to represent
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And he would always joke around and tell me, like, oh, Marissa, like, you're going to go get your golden handcuffs, like, go into big law. And
Uh-huh.
a couple years ago, he told me, like, oh, wow, you actually did it. Look, you
Yeah.
stuck true to the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
awesome.
and that experience doing clinic, like working for him is what ended up wanting, like knowing that in the future I wanted to become a professor
Mhm.
as well.
And
Yeah.
so you just mentioned a couple of things, and I do want us, for our listeners and viewers, to know that difference, right? Because for us, we understand it. But you mentioned clinical work,
Yes.
and then as opposed to like big law.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, we're focusing here on the clinical work, but can you explain to people like what you mean by that? Because
Yeah.
they'll hear that and they don't know what that
Yes, of
means.
course.
They're like, yeah, going to school is going to school. Or there's a
Yeah.
professor they just teach, but what is clinical
Yeah.
work?
So in terms of clinics, I think clinics are the best part of law school.
Mm.
So when you apply or when you go to law school, you have your doctrinal classes, which are like your traditional classes where you go and a professor lectures at you and you ask questions and they call on you, right?
Yes. What we see in movies.
What you
Yeah.
see in movies, exactly. But clinical classes are way cooler
Mm.
because I always tell students I'm the fun part of law school
Right,
because
right.
it's your first exposure of becoming an attorney or what
Actually
is it
doing
like to
stuff,
be an
yeah.
attorney. So when you enroll into a clinic, there is a class component, but part of your class work is that you actually represent people, or you actually take on active cases and you're the lead attorney on the case is what I tell my students. You meet with your client, you prepare all of the work. I'm there obviously to correct it, You go to court, guess who gets to make the appearance? You do. You got to interface with a police officer, immigration customs enforcement. Guess what? You get to do it. Obviously, I'm there, right? But it's your first exposure to law. And I think, doctrinal professors might knock me on this, but I really think that's what prepares you to become an attorney because it's that practical skill set training. So if
And these
you're
are students doing
and
this,
these are
right?
students doing it. This is students doing the work. And you don't know how many times when I go to court, that a judge will tell the students, like, you are so well prepared, way better prepared than
Oh, yeah.
any of the attorneys who
Oh, yeah.
appear in my courtroom. So I would really highly, highly encourage students. And there's clinics, I do immigrant rights work, so mine is an immigration clinic. But like, for example, Loyola has over 20 in-house clinics, post-conviction work, representing kids in delinquency proceedings. You have a human rights clinic, Project of the Innocents. So it's really catered to whatever interests that you have. We even have a bankruptcy and a tax clinic where you're helping low-income communities. But if that's an area of law that you like, trust me, there's probably a clinic for it. So that's what clinical work is. And then just in regards to big law, that means when you go into big corporate law firms, not knocking on them either. We
No,
need,
absolutely. Yeah.
first generation, attorneys of color in all of these spaces.
100%. Yeah.
And that's where you actually go and make a lot of the money. So you want to do that, you can.
Right.
But yeah, clinical work is, even if you're interested in doing the corporate route, you should still take a clinic because those skills, are transferable to any practice.
So you're a professor at USC. What was his name? Sorry.
Niels Frenzen, Professor Frenzen. Yeah.
Professor Frenzen. So he was like, no, I know one day you're going to just go off and do corporate work, make big money, and you're not going to stick with this passion of immigration. But, you stuck with it. All right. So immigration work through USC. And part of what I see and have seen kind of as you continue to tell your story is that you find community everywhere that you go. And I want to know a little bit more about that. We've kind of touched on it, but it's a little bit different than other people approach it, right? Like a lot of, let's say like me growing up, was my community was my family, and that was kind of it. It was quite isolated. I didn't go places and like make this large community and have these people kind of supporting. And it was usually just kind of me going to whether it was high school or college, and just part of it was because I was commuting, a lot, and I wasn't there to like make friends because I didn't have time, right?
Yeah.
I just had to go to class, come right back home. But everywhere that you've gone, you make community, and that actually is such a I don't want to say skill because that makes it seem like it's something that you do for your own benefit, right? But it's something that is really a blessing ultimately for yourself and for others. But like, how have you been? What do you think it is about you that you arrive anywhere, whether it's in high school, whether it's in college, whether it's in Loyola, as we're gonna talk about, but you form community, and that not only helps you but helps everybody else around you.
Yeah. I don't know how I do
Yeah.
it, Kenny. That's a good question. I think it's because, I think it does probably have to do maybe my personality type, but more than anything is because I grew up, I did also grow up isolated with just my family, right? But because I think I had other people come in to support, like that became what I knew was like my support system, right? So maybe in a selfish way, it is like I know that I need a support system, so I need to build community. But I also feel like in community, you not just support for myself, but support for one another. And that there's healing in that. So something that I talk to my students too is that doing this work is hard. It's heavy. Like in terms like immigration is a vast area of practice. Trust me, there's money in it too. If you want to do like entertainment, guess what? All the celebrities need their visas. All of the sports players need their visas, right? I do the humanitarian stuff, which is the heavy stuff. But, I work with unaccompanied kids, survivors of trafficking, asylum seekers. And that's a heavy work to do alone, right? And community, you can help one another and support one another in community. And that's what I tell my students. And I think that's also something that's very, that I tell them, like, unique about American culture is that it's very individualistic in comparison to like, other countries, immigrant communities, like your family's very united, supporting one another. that we have to foster that, right? And I think that's why I inherently do it. And I try to build community with people who are obviously like-minded and do the work that I do, or are interested in it. And it's really kind of like being able to s- to support one another, build that kinship, as Father Greg would say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I think that's so insightful. Because to see how people arrive ultimately at the type of work that they're doing and why. Because I think, let's say, like from our ends, we kind of arrive at similar sort of ends, but from different sort of ways. As I said, it was just our family. Really, mostly seemed alone. Didn't feel alone so much because like we're so united, right?
Mhm.
But it's because of that I also know that like there are a lot of people that don't know that there is help for them, right? That they
Mhm.
have these legal options, that they have these legal recourses, and wanting to be that person or that office that helps those people, right? And gives them those options, right? And it's still ultimately about helping people.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think too, this is something I tell people. I mean, tell my students is that when we think about the community we want to serve, we'll take the immigrant community because that's what I talk
Yeah, yeah.
about all the time as an example. Their needs aren't isolated to immigration law,
Hmm.
right? And we have to see people and communities holistically.
Mm.
And like as attorneys, one of the fabulous things that we do is that we actually are pretty adaptable. I know we're rigid, but we should be
Yeah,
adaptable. And we have the skill sets where we could learn other areas of practice, right?
yeah,
Maybe we can't be experts in them, but enough to potentially guide our clients and our community, right?
yeah.
So thinking that way, like if your interest is maybe serving the immigrant community, but not immigration law, that's okay. Trust me, there's millions of needs, and
Mm.
there's another area of law that you can practice in where
Yeah.
you'll still be serving that
Right,
same community.
right, right,
Mhm.
right. All right. So now you're going to law school. This is a little bit of a not that we're changing course here completely, but for kids who are interested in law, what is your advice? They got LSATs, they got personal statements, they got a bunch of things that they have to do.
Yeah.
What law school should they go to? Where should they apply? What major do it's
Yeah.
all these
Mhm.
questions. Is there something that kind of sticks out to you? You in particular, being a professor who's been a professor for quite a long time, directing this large clinic at
Yeah.
Loyola Law School, has intimate knowledge of sort of this process. What would you
Yeah, I actually
recommend?
give I'm gonna say on my downtime, which I don't actually have a lot of, but I
Mhm.
actually quite regularly review
Mm,
applications and talk to students when they reach out to me about the application
that's cool.
process. So a couple pieces of advice. It doesn't matter what you major in. Major in what you want to major
Mhm.
in, that you like and that you'll do well in,
That's so
right?
surprising for people to
Yeah.
hear
I was
too.
like, "You wanna major
Yeah,
in music? Cool, go for
go
it."
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not gonna matter. I mean, there's probably majors that are helpful, like they say philosophy was. I was a double major in international relations and Spanish,
Mm,
but I don't besides my Spanish that I do use in work every day, I think international relations maybe has helped in the sense of understanding what's going on in the world and
mhm,
where my clients are coming from, but it wasn't necessary,
mhm,
right? So major in whatever you want. When you apply to law school, you should apply in three buckets, right? Your reach schools, or those schools that you don't think you'll have a chance to get in.
mhm.
Trust me, you'll be surprised. I've had
Yeah.
friends that get into those schools with scores that they didn't think could
Mhm,
actually get them in, right?
mhm.
So your Harvard, your Yales,
Go for it.
you're in between, like where maybe your LSAT score and your GPA are like pretty much like solid that you'll get in, and then your safety, like for sure you're gonna get in.
Mhm.
That way you kind of have an array to pick from.
Yeah.
And you don't lose anything by applying to those reach
Yeah.
schools, right?
Of
Like,
course.
might as well just give it a shot. And
I'll say
so,
this real quick. My dad one
uh
time when I was uh it was I think it was yeah, it was when I was in high school trying out for basketball team or something, and making that decision, he was like, "Listen, you're already not on the team. You can't get any more not on the team than you are right now. So what do you have to lose?
yeah,
Like,
just
go
do
for
it.
it,
Do it.
right?
Exactly.
So the upside is much better than
Yeah.
remaining kind of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Hmm.
And so do that. In terms of the LSAT is a horrible exam and it has absolutely no bearing on the type of attorney that you're going to be.
Sponsored by
So,
the LSAT. I'm just kidding.
and because I get a lot of students that come in and super upset with their score.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's a stupid exam,
Mm,
right? But unfortunately, you have to take it to get in. Um, what's considered like a solid score would be like, I mean, like a good score, like a 155 to a 160, right? And even if you don't get that, still apply. Why not? And when it comes to your admission statement, law schools really want to see like what perspective do you bring in, right? This is where I tell students like you have to pull all of your cards, all of your life experiences, right? I know sometimes people shy away from wanting to share personal things, but I tell them like, well, think about the students who are legacies, and they just have the advantage. Your advantage is your story.
Oh, yeah.
You need to tell it, right? And share how your personal experience will shape the law. That's what the admissions really wants to read. So be bold, be brave, and be willing to share your story. I know it's hard, but I highly, highly recommend people to do so. And then when it comes to picking law schools, yes, if you get into a top 10, right, you should go to the top 10. And the reason being is not necessarily because I think they're better schools, but just because in terms of network and if you want to work nationwide, those schools tend to have a stronger network. If you don't get into a top 10, then you should think regionally. Like, where is it that I want to practice law? What kind of law? Because the law, more than anything, is about your work ethic and who you know, right? So, for example, I get a lot of students who tell me, like, well, I got into UC, well, it's not UC Hastings anymore, but UC San Francisco and Loyola. And I told them, I was like, well, Loyola is a law school with the strongest network in LA. If you want to practice in LA, then you should come here. Because it's going to be a lot easier to get a job than if you come from UC Hastings and you're starting from zero. But if you want to be in the Bay, then maybe go to UC Hastings, right? So think regionally and think of also a school that will foster what you want to do. One of the reasons I decided Loyola is because it was so highly ranked when it came to doing public interest work. We were number 2 at the nation by the time that I applied. And I wanted a school that was going to foster that and wasn't going to push me to do the corporate route. So those would be my pieces of advice for students applying to law school.
Those are golden. And it's quite often, we think about just, hey, trying to get into the highest possible law school or the best school possible. And like you said, I think if you get into the top 10, go for it. And like, we're definitely not saying don't do it. I think you should, shoot for the moon.
Yeah,
right?
might as well.
If that's, go for it. And if you get it, great. And if not, then, there's all these other considerations because you're so right? If you want to work in LA, you got to look at who has the strongest network within Los Angeles. And, look, there are things like the LSAT, right? That I wasn't ever the strongest in like those standardized tests, right?
Oh, me neither.
But it's something that you have to do and you have to, it's a step. So go ahead and do it and, take it on with the best attitude for the kids and check it off and move on, right?
Exactly.
And I think the personal statement is great too because so often people from maybe immigrant backgrounds where there are no relationships, there are no connections anywhere. Rather, certainly as you experienced with me, it was like wherever I stepped into, it was like usually the first of, right, and no other connections there.
Yeah.
And knowing that your disadvantage, quote unquote, is actually your advantage.
Exactly.
And use it.
Yeah.
Schools want that perspective that you're going to bring to them.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned that you decided to go to law school because of the clinical because of the public interest spent.
Yeah.
So you go to Loyola. You mentioned earlier that maybe that Loyola experience at the beginning wasn't quite as great as the USC experience. I know what you're talking about, right? Can you explain a little bit about that? And then sort of like looking back on it, how that helped you then moving forward, right? Because in the moment, maybe it doesn't feel that great, right?
Law school is a humbling experience, let me tell you. And it's humbling because I think it's a new way of thinking. I went straight through. I was pretty young. You took time off, right?
So actually what I did, well, technically, like I went to UCLA. I graduated in 3 years because I was trying to pack so many classes because I was commuting 3 hours each way, for another time. So I graduated in 3 and I took that year off and then I went to Loyola. So technically, in terms of age, the same sort of age as if I had just gone straight through, but I took that year off in between. Yeah.
So because I was very young when I entered law school. And I'm saying if you want to, and the thing is, I went straight through because I knew it's what I wanted to do. But it was shocking, I think I would say, going from, undergrad, having a really good time and doing really well academically, to going to law school and not having a good time and not doing well academically. I didn't do horribly, but it's not like to the standard that I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I tell all students this. I actually got my first C since the 6th grade,
Oh, no.
my first semester of law school. And that was the best C of my life.
I love that you say that.
Yeah, and it was civil procedure.
Cipro.
I hate Cipro.
So you'll hate that. That was my favorite class.
Oh my God, Kenny.
but I had that experience with other classes, right? It's like,
and so because I still remember when we took that exam, when the proctor called 5 minutes, the entire classroom gasped. And best C of my life. And trust me, does civil procedure come up in my life now as an attorney? Yeah. And what do? I just look it up. It's not that complicated. Yeah. But that's what I mean by humbling. And I tell my students that all the time because they're like, "You got a C." I was like, "Sure did," but you best believe I got that A+ in immigration law. That's why I teach that. And I don't teach Civ Pro. But I tell them to also show them like, I'm human and you will still make it, right? So it was a very humbling experience in that sense. And also because, being first generation, you walk into the classroom, and there are like Loyola is actually very diverse, and I can't imagine some other law schools are not diverse. But going into a space, again, that wasn't necessarily meant for you, that's competitive, right? The imposter syndrome kicks in hardcore. And I struggled a lot my first year to find, again, like I kind of lost sight of my purpose. Like I even like wondered, why did I come to law school? I was also learning subjects that I didn't care about. Contracts, don't care about, but these are all just classes you have to take, right? So I did kind of lose sight of it. So that's your first year is like very humbling experience in that sense.
Can I ask you right there?
Yeah.
So part of I think what my experience with that first year of law school, right? You come in and kind of had almost like a little
Chip on your shoulder, like, oh,
you're like even a little arrogant, like, hey, like I did, well enough in high school. I did well in like college. Like I'm gonna crush this too.
Everyone says it's hard. It's gonna be that hard.
Yeah. And in fact, when we were actually before the first exam, the first exam that I took was contracts, and I remember like I had memorized everything and I knew like all the sections and UCC code, everything, and like man, I felt so confident. I even had like friends, like classmates, would ask me about like witches, and I was like, man, I'm gonna crush this exam. And then like I didn't get the grade that I was expecting, right? And then realizing that the exam actually wasn't asking for me to spit back things that I memorized, right?
Exactly, that's another thing.
And so like what law school you said they're teaching you to think differently, it's nothing like any other exam I had taken. And it's not that it was, oh my God, it's so tough and it was so hard and like I couldn't have done great. No, it's just that I didn't know what they were looking for, right? So then afterwards, right, whenever students ask me or my siblings went to Loyola afterwards, I would tell them, hey, like study this way, like grab an outline, do this, this is what they're looking for, because that's not what I went in there looking. So was that similar to your experience? And can you like, what advice would you give to students?
No, that is completely my experience. Because law school teaches you how to, I'm going to use issue spot, right? So the exams are very different from what you get in undergrad, because undergrad's like a question, you memorize something and you spit it back out, right? Here you get basically like a story of a person that you might be representing. And this person is coming to you and telling you your story, right? So based on their story, you have to identify what their legal issues are, right? And you have to take those story facts and then make the analogy to the law, right? So the things that you memorized to basically argue that this person deserves XYZ thing or not, right? And it's a way of training your mind to basically spot these problems as someone tells you a story, which is a very unique way of thinking that you don't learn until you get to law school. And when you're first gen, right, and luckily you were there for your siblings, right, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to memorize because that's what I've done my entire life, and I've done well, and I understand the concept, right, but it's how the application, right? So take practice exams is my other thing that I tell students, because students get so caught up on memorizing the law when it's really like how you apply it is what matters and is going to get you that grade.
Right.
Yeah.
So that, and then you mentioned imposter syndrome. How do you, or what do you tell students nowadays? Because I think students do feel that, right? And when when I tell students a lot, it's just, or people that share that with me, it's like, hey, look, you're not supposed to know. You're actually the first of your
Yeah.
family. Like, you're not supposed to know this stuff, and you're stepping into a place that's new. It's okay to like not know,
Yeah.
right? You're there, so you belong.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's harder to accept that truth, right,
Yeah.
on a daily basis, but to continue to remind yourself of that, right? And you know, people come from many different backgrounds, but what do you tell students now when they come to you? Because I know you are somebody that students come to share a
Yeah.
lot of their sort of frustrations or difficulties that they're going through.
Yeah. I tell them that I struggle with imposter syndrome to this day. And they look at me, they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, it doesn't go away. I was like, I wish I could tell you that it went away. And they're like, you have imposter syndrome? I was like, yeah, I've been teaching now for 11 years. And there's moments when I walk into certain spaces or given certain positions, like I've been also blessed to serve the city. I was actually the president for the Commission of Civil Rights for the city of Los Angeles. And when I got that appointment, I remember being like, I don't even know what I'm doing. What do you mean you're going to give me this? Right. So that's why I'm saying like that feeling is never going to go away. And I think it's just honoring it. I think it's important to honor it. Right. Like, why am I feeling this way? Not ignore it. Right. And part of it's because we've been told that we don't belong in these spaces that we're talking about. Right. Or like that this is not that's supposed to happen to someone like you. But hey, it is. Right. And it's happening for a reason. And it's because you worked hard.
100%.
Right. And you have to rely, and this is what I tell my students all the time, is like, what you have in comparison to other classmates is that you are resilient. It's like you have gone through so much more in life and have made it than some of your counterparts. And you have that grit and that ability to figure things out. You're going to figure it out, right? So honor that imposter syndrome, give it its space, but just know that you have the skills, the innate skill set because of your life experience to figure it out. And you're going to do it, right? And just knowing that we still, like, even like my students seem like, but you're so successful, which I appreciate, right? But I still struggle with imposter syndrome, and letting them know, like, just like you feel it, I feel it too, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, that's awesome. And look, they're there in that place now, and so they belong.
yeah,
Right. I mean, it's
you
quite
totally
as simple
belong.
as that. Yeah.
It's an act of rebellion. I love it. So,
Of course, there you go.
of course,
Well,
right?
we've learned a lot about Marissa. But you know what? Let's just kind of skip ahead into this and let's talk about LIJC, Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. Can you tell us a story of this amazing clinic that didn't exist? Actually, nothing like an immigration society even existed at Loyola when you started. And you've mentioned active rebellion, and I mentioned initially, creator, someone who's creating things. We've learned about you being someone who creates communities, right, as well, and how you got this started, and how it's become what it is nowadays.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, so I went to Loyola because it was number 2 in the nation for public interest law. And then I get there and I was like, oh, wow, I want to do immigration and there's nothing for immigration law, right? So again, it's like, well, this is what I want. And I had other classmates that were interested in the subject. So it's like, well, as students, you have power, right? We forget. And it's like, well, creating that space and showing the school, like, this is very important. We are the number 2 school, in the nation for public interest law. I don't know what our ranking is now. In LA, in close to MacArthur Park in Pico Union, and we don't have an immigration clinic, right? And so I worked with Professor Kathleen Kim. We started the Immigration Law Society, a student group, to basically bring in, speakers and stuff to talk about immigration law. And then students were hungry for experience. And so along with the Mexican American Bar Association, the Immigration Law Society partnered up with the Mexican American Bar Association to give basically free workshops in the community, free consultations. And part of that was giving to the community, but also exposing students to at least the interview process of immigration law. And so that's what kind of served as my basis of my fellowship project to pitch the clinic to Loyola. And at that time, I was interning at Homeboy Industries because I'm really intersected I was very interested, and still am because a lot of my work has to do with this, with the intersection of immigration and criminal law and immigration consequences of gang involvement That's another story as to how I ended up doing that
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah.
But while I was there, we connected with the church Dolores Mission, which is a church in Boyle Heights, to basically co-host these intake clinics.
Okay.
And what's interesting is about the community of Boyle Heights is that Boyle Heights is considered the Ellis Island of the West Coast.
Mm,
So all like waves of immigration have gone through that community,
mhm.
right? And it's mixed status primarily. So people who live there are undocumented green card holders, maybe have DACA, whatever, right?
Right.
The majority of them have some sort of immigration issue. So that's why naturally we wanted to go there because there was a need that wasn't being met.
Mhm.
And so that led to the basis of creating the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic because it was showing the school, one, that students are super interested and you need this, but two, there's a need that we can fill. And I always joke around and say that the Jesuit stars aligned
Mhm.
because Homeboy Industries, Dolores Mission, and Loyola, they're all Jesuit institutions. So I was like, we all got to support
Yeah,
one
yeah,
another,
yeah.
right? And that served as basically the basis. And I think one of the reasons why it's like thinking back into my trajectory now too, like when I think I was meant to go to Loyola,
Mhm,
right? Because
mhm,
had I gone to another law school, I don't think I would have had the opportunity to do this.
mm.
I also graduated during a recession, right? So I graduated in 2012. There were no jobs. The majority of my classmates and we had to create our jobs.
Mm.
And by creating my job, per se, I ended up being able to create my dream job. Like I always knew that I wanted to go into teaching. I just didn't know that I was going to do it immediately
Yeah,
in the start of my career, which I don't regret, right?
yeah,
Because I absolutely love what I do.
yeah.
So that's like very quick as to
Sure.
like how
That's so
we
cool.
developed
Yeah.
the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic.
And all right, so you mentioned fellowship,
Uh-huh.
and you were doing all this work during law school to prepare and apply for the fellowship. And can you explain what that
Yeah.
is?
Yes, and of course, what I will say too is that right now is actually an excellent time to apply to law school
Mm-hmm.
because there's a high demand for attorneys, and
Okay.
there's a
There you
lot
go.
of jobs open right now where you don't even have to do a fellowship,
Mm.
even if you want to do public interest work.
Yeah.
So I was like, apply to law school. Um,
Title
so
law school.
usually it can be very tough to break into the nonprofit sector right
Mhm.
out of law school because nonprofits usually don't have money, right? So there's fellowships, which are basically like grants that you can apply for as a recent graduate. There's different ones. Your institution might have one. There's also other ones called like the Skadden Fellowship, the Equal Justice Work Fellowship, which basically allow recent law grads to develop a project, right, and work at a nonprofit. So I similarly did that. I applied. Loyola has its own fellowship, so I applied for the fellowship. I was initially housed at Homeboy Industries and then transferred over to Loyola once the clinic was about to launch. And my project was creating this immigration clinic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fellowships are really great to break into the nonprofit sector, the public interest sector, and also are great because you get to develop a project that's your own. But the cool thing now, like I said, is that there's such a demand for attorneys right now that you can even skip that step and just go straight through. But yeah, that's what a fellowship is.
Okay, and when so you go to Loyola, you see that there is no clinic with regards to immigration. There's not even an immigration law group at school for
Hmm.
students. So you help get that started. When even at that moment, are you thinking already like, hey, I want to create a clinic. I want to do this. Is that something that's on your mind already?
Yeah, so by the time I started doing like the work in the community and I was working with Professor Kim,
Mm-hmm.
and because I would always be one of the big things is that as the Immigration Law Society, we were pushing for the school to establish a clinic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you need to offer a clinic. I didn't think necessarily like I'm going to be running the clinic. I was just like Loyola put a clinic in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it basically became like, well, the law school kept saying like, well, we need funding, we need this, we need that. Now that's when I was like, well, then okay, then Kathleen, who was my boss, I told her like she was just like, then we're gonna start it, right? And luckily, Professor Kathleen Kim had previous clinical experience when she was at Stanford before she came to Loyola, so she
Mm-hmm.
already had because obviously I'm a newbie attorney,
Yeah.
learning myself. She had the foundation to help set up LIJC, at
Mm-hmm.
least the clinical portion of it with the law students.
Yeah.
And then we designed our model to be community based, which means that traditionally, law school clinics get cases referred to them from nonprofits. We actually go into the community,
Mhm.
do the consultations, pick the cases, and bring them in-house. And the cases that we do in the clinic vary all the time depending on community needs because we want to remain responsive. That's one of
Mhm.
our missions in
Mhm.
LIJC. So I kind of think it's not a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
But I was really excited because I knew that my dream one day was to be a clinical
Mhm.
professor.
Mhm.
And I'd say that I am one.
Yeah, you are one. And you're so this entire time we know you want to do immigration work. You want to help out that community. You want to help folks who are in need and you start being involved in this immigration law society, start working towards the clinic. But from like outside looking in, I look at someone who had this passion and a purpose of helping people and then continue to create her opportunities, right? But as you're describing, bringing the LIJC, Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic, to fruition, there's all these aspects of someone who had a vision. You formed a mastermind group, right? That someone who you needed funding, you went out and got the funding. That requires you talking with people, pitching a vision even to people, right? And getting people to buy into like, hey, like I want to be a part of that, right? Where it wasn't necessarily something that was theirs, right? And developing all that, that has aspects of building a business. This is an organization, but all aspects of building a business of, and not only that, but completing it. You didn't go to business school. You didn't
Did
do
not.
any of that, but you've done that already. What it is today, 10 plus years later, has grown and is helping so many people, has helped out countless people. When you look back on that, I'm not going to ask would you change anything, no, but like how, when you look back at Marissa going through that entire process and somebody else maybe who wants to create something similar, like what would be that encouragement or words of advice, even if they don't have that background?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. And I think it's also because I don't ever take a time to reflect on
Hmm.
it, you know?
Hmm. That's what we
Um,
want you to do here.
I know, I know. I was like, thank you, Kenny. Maybe this is what I needed right now
Yeah.
in life. Um, I have thought back, like, if I could tell myself in high school what I would do now, I don't think I would believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think what led me was my passion, like this is what I want to do. It's like I said again, a labor of love, and that's what drove me to want to create this. Then I think also the ability that I was able to build that support system of other classmates interested in doing this work and professors at Loyola that I wanted to do this work to basically form that community that created LIJC. And I feel very thankful to God that I've been fortunate enough to have this purpose and really be able to say that I do what I love and that I had the chance to, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
create it.
Mm-hmm.
My piece of advice would be is definitely let your passion and love lead. Because that's what's gonna kind of carry you through it from these moments of imposter syndrome and thinking that you're not able to do it. And then the second would be like create that support system, that network. And that's why I said like reach out to us,
Mm-hmm.
because I had people like Maria, I had people like Kathleen, I had people like Professor Frenzen who were part of that support system that end of the day helped me get through this and provide me with the knowledge, skills, and connections. And there's other people too that I'm like Jack,
Mm-hmm.
who helped build this to be able to make it what it is today. And the best thing about, and I would say also don't stop creating, or being like motivated to do other things because, the great thing about doing the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic is that we're expanding. We're doing more binational work. And part of the work that we do abroad, because we do immigrant right works abroad. We take DACA recipients from, the states, abroad as well.
I
Is
was part of that
I
group that went
know
with
I
you that
did get to
summer.
take you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
very honored that
Yeah.
I got to travel with you, Kenny. And and part of that creation was because we was led by love and by the needs that our community and trying to fulfill the needs of our community, right? So I would just lead with love and build that support system. You know, you can do it alone, but it's a lot easier if you build a team,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so take that step and send that email.
Yeah. I'm gonna drive a little deeper here,
Oh,
if I
okay.
can.
Yes.
Every single story that you've told us and every single place that you've arrived at um, should have dissuaded you from where you're at today, right? When you get, let's just fast forward to law school, this stuff doesn't exist. And I'm sure when you try to get things going, they're like, no, or maybe people weren't as receptive. And um, I think people have passions, and maybe people, young people, feel that they have a purpose, even like, hey, this is what I want to do. But everything around them saying no, and everything around them, or the people around them, even, are saying that that's not possible, or move on to something else. Um, what is it then that? Because we can say, we can say passion, we can say drive, but that can wane as well, right? Or that can get hurt at some point, rather, or
Mhm.
diminish. What is it then that in those moments that made you keep going, or is it just a matter of, what, hey, this is what I want to do, put my head down, and like, let's go.
I just think I'm really stubborn, to be
Yeah, 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 yeah,
completely
yeah,
honest.
yeah,
And as I've been told, as many attorneys are,
yeah.
I would say, um, I am stubborn, and I'll get into moments where I want what I want, and this is what I'm going to do, and that's it.
Mhm.
And so I think it was part of that stubborn, like, let's call it like fighting spirit,
There
you
you go.
know.
Yeah, yeah,
I know my mom's always like, es bien terca.
yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
tells me that. I was like,
Very
but
stubborn.
I'm very
Yeah,
stubborn.
yeah.
And but honestly, because people have asked me like, what else would you do in life? It's I don't know. I don't know what else I would do.
Mhm,
And and I think if the clinical route wouldn't have worked, I would have done immigrant rights work, period,
mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm,
And there was a bunch of moments in life, even going back when I was younger, where this was not what was meant for me. But I think it was, and also I will say, like, the one thing in life that I've kind of had control over has been my education and my career,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so I think that's where, like, when life growing up got too chaotic, I did take comfort in schooling,
mhm,
and
mhm,
comfort in my work and doing well and doing what I wanted. And I think that part of that, yeah, like work ethic, is
mhm.
what kind of pushed me through to persevere during those times. And people still tell me no,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, but I want to. So I'm
Right,
going to,
right, right.
um, and I know, so yeah, I think it's a combination of
Yeah.
those. Yeah, I would say my fighting spirit.
There you go.
Fighting
I like
spirit. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think as attorneys, that is something that is real, and that we need.
Yeah.
People have it in different sort of amounts, or show it differently. But look, if you don't believe the law is correct, our job is to change that, and that is a fighting spirit, right? That
Yes,
is a stubbornness.
exactly.
That is whatever you want to call it, but it needs to be changed because it's unjust,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you've shown that not just with the law, but also in creating a clinic that helps and trains and continues to push forward justice, right? So,
Ah, thank you.
Marissa.
Kenny, Kenny, Kenny.
Yeah. All right. You know what? I know that our time here is coming to a close,
Hmm.
so I just kind of want to finish off here with speaking just a little bit of sharing a couple of things that folks said about you and your thoughts on
Oh.
that. Okay. Um, we've had words thrown out as driven, people person, that you build relationships, that you push people and nudge them outside of their comfort zone. That um, without you, um, they would not be where they're at. And the sort of adjectives are all around the same sort of idea here. Um, why do you care so much about helping people in their own careers, right? Because there's one thing helping folks, right,
Hmm.
like clients and the immigration community, but you're not just doing that. You're also helping build other people to continue to do that work, but to grow themselves. You've had students that are now in leadership positions within the clinic, right? People that have bought so much into the purpose and the vision that you created, that they've remained and they've continued to help it grow and want to continue to be a part of it. Why do you care so much about helping people?
Well, I think in terms of like well, yeah, because it just hasn't been students. It's been other attorneys and interns that I've had that weren't directly students of mine. But mentoring has always been a big part of my life. I've been mentoring folks since I was in high school as well, and so to me, it's a form of mentorship. And that's also my community. My students are my community. I'm part of the legal community, and I've told students, like, I had attorneys tell me, like, the goal is for you to surpass me. And I tell them, like, the goal is for you to now surpass me. Right. And, and I think it goes back to what I've said in terms of like helping the immigrant communities out of love. Right. My students come from all backgrounds. I've had primarily, yes, like I said, immigrant students of color. I've also had white students. Right. But they're all part of the legal community. And if I can help and impulse, what they're passionate about and ingrain in them some idea of paying it forward, then I feel that I've done my job, right? At the end of the day, people are people, and I do have an idea. I do believe that we are somehow all connected in a way, right? So anything that I can basically push forward and and seeing people thrive, seeing my students thrive, seeing them, like, I have some that are like legal directors now, doing amazing, teaching me things. They come in and tell me like all these like innovative law things they're doing. I was like, man, I didn't even know we could do that. Right. It's incredibly rewarding. And it's a way that I also thank those who helped me. Right. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer.
Yanira said I could share this. Yanira Lemos, who is a part of the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic and helps run that along with you. She said that, a story about there were some like TV crews outside, and that she thought that you were going to speak, and as you guys were walking out, you were like, okay, you go speak, right? And because that she doesn't like to do that, but you want to build that in her, right? So I could absolutely see that. When we went to Guadalajara together, you did that same thing with her, right? She didn't know that there was going to be a TV crew filming her sort of speech there, but there she was, and she did an amazing job.
Exactly.
And so often I think it is just that, right? It's about helping people have those spaces because they will perform. They are great, right? It's just maybe they haven't historically been available. To,
or pushed, And a lot of this work is about we're already outside of our comfort zone. Might as well just go for it, And so I do that. I do that to my attorneys and to my students. I was like, oh yeah, it's not me. It's going to be you. But that's how you learn. That's how you learn.
Yeah. And you don't have time to think about it. So you just do
it. Exactly.
All right. Well, Marissa, I think we've reached our time. Thank you so much for driving over, because I know it was a little bit of a hike for you to come over here.
I'm happy to be here. I love spending time with you guys. The Ramirez crew.
And we're going to have to do our literal hike sometime later, because that's what we were actually going to do today. But then we roped Marissa into doing a podcast instead.
Oh, thank you.
But thank
Quite
you.
Honored.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think, as I said, this is going to be so helpful to many, many people. Thank you for sharing your story. You're an inspiration, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
All right.
It's been a blast.